Marcus Thompson opened his hotel room curtains and smiled at the bright London morning. The sun was shining through the clouds, and he knew today was going to be special. He had been planning this trip for 3 long years. Every month he saved money from his job as an accountant in a small town in Ohio. He worked extra hours and skipped expensive dinners just to make this dream come true. The 35-year-old man had never been outside of America before. London felt like a magical place to him. The red buses, the old buildings, and the accents of the people made everything seem like a movie. But today he had one special goal. He wanted to see the famous royal guards on their horses. He had seen thousands of pictures online, but he wanted his own photos. Not just any photos, though. He wanted pictures that would make everyone back home jealous. Marcus picked up his brand new camera from the dresser. He had spent almost $1,000 on it just for this trip. It was heavy in his hands and had so many buttons that he still did not understand what they all did. But he knew it took amazing pictures. He had practiced for weeks before the trip, taking photos of everything in his hometown. His neighbors thought he was crazy when he started photographing fire hydrants and street signs. But Marcus wanted to be ready for London. He put on his favorite blue polo shirt and comfortable walking shoes. His wife had bought him the shirt for his birthday and said the color made his eyes look nice. She could not come on the trip because someone needed to watch their 2 children. But she made him promise to take lots of pictures so she could see everything when he got home. Marcus walked down the busy London streets feeling excited and nervous at the same time. People rushed past him going to work. The city was so much bigger and louder than his quiet hometown. Car horns honked and people talked in languages he could not understand. But he loved every minute of it. This was adventure. This was the life he had dreamed about while sitting in his boring office back home. He stopped at a coffee shop and bought a cup of tea. The man behind the counter had a thick British accent, and Marcus had to ask him to repeat the price 3 times. But even that made him smile. Everything was so different and exciting here. He pulled out his phone and took a selfie with his teacup, the first of many photos he would take today. As Marcus walked toward Horse Guards Parade, he could feel his heart beating faster. He had looked at this place on Google Maps hundreds of times. He had read every article about the royal guards and their horses. He knew they had been protecting the royal family for hundreds of years. He knew their uniforms cost thousands of dollars. He knew the horses were specially trained military animals, but most importantly, he knew this was where he would get the perfect photo. Not just a regular tourist photo that everyone takes. He wanted something special, something unique, something that would show his friends and family that this trip was worth all the money and planning. Marcus checked his camera battery one more time. It was fully charged. He had 3 extra memory cards in his pocket. He was ready for anything. As he turned the corner and saw the red, uniformed guards sitting perfectly still on their black horses, he felt a rush of excitement. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Today was going to be the best day of his entire life. He had no idea how wrong he was about to be. Marcus arrived at Horse Guards Parade and stopped in his tracks. The scene before him was more impressive than any photo could capture. 2 royal guards sat on their magnificent horses like living statues. Their red uniforms were perfectly pressed, and their tall black hats made them look like giants. The horses were beautiful black animals that stood completely still, despite all the noise around them. A crowd of about 30 tourists had already gathered around the guards. People from all over the world were taking photos and talking in different languages. Marcus heard German, Spanish, French, and Japanese being spoken. Everyone wanted to capture this famous London scene. The guards looked straight ahead and never moved a muscle. They seemed to be made of stone rather than flesh and blood. Marcus noticed the white lines painted on the ground. They formed a clear boundary that separated the tourists from the guards and their horses. Everyone stayed behind these lines while they took their pictures. Signs were posted in multiple languages warning people not to cross the barriers. The message was clear in English. Do not touch the horses. Do not cross the white lines. Keep a respectful distance. But Marcus felt disappointed as he looked through his camera lens. From behind the white line, his photos looked exactly like every other tourist photo he had seen online. The guards were too far away. The horses looked small in the frame. There was nothing special or unique about these shots. They were just ordinary tourist pictures that anyone could take. He watched as other tourists took their photos and walked away looking satisfied. A family from Italy posed together with the guards in the background. A young couple from Australia took turns photographing each other. An elderly man from Germany carefully adjusted his camera settings before taking his shot. They all seemed happy with their standard tourist photos. Marcus studied the guard on the left more carefully. The man sat perfectly upright in his saddle without moving even slightly. His face showed no expression at all. His eyes looked straight ahead as if he was looking at something far in the distance. Sweat dripped down his face from under the heavy, black hat, but he did not wipe it away. This was incredible discipline and training. The horse beneath the guard was equally impressive. It was a beautiful black mare with a shiny coat and strong muscles. Her name was Wellington, according to a small sign near the barrier. She had been trained since she was young to stand still for hours. Camera flashes went off constantly around her, but she never flinched or moved. Her ears would occasionally twitch when someone made a loud noise, but otherwise she was like a statue. Marcus took about 20 photos from behind the white line. He tried different angles and camera settings, but every photo looked the same. Generic tourist shots that could have been taken by anyone. He felt frustrated and disappointed. He had spent so much money on this camera and this trip. He needed something better. Something that would make people stop and stare when he showed them his vacation photos. He looked at the white line on the ground. It seemed so arbitrary and unnecessary. The guards were professionals. Surely they could handle having tourists a little bit closer. The horses were well-trained military animals. A few steps forward would not hurt anyone. Marcus began to think that maybe the rules were too strict. Maybe he could bend them just a little bit to get the perfect shot he was looking for. The crowd around him continued to grow larger and louder. Marcus looked around at the other tourists. Most of them had taken their photos and were walking away to see other attractions. A few people remained, but they were busy looking at their phones or talking to each other. The guards continued to sit perfectly still on their horses. This seemed like the perfect moment to get closer for a better shot. Without thinking about the consequences, Marcus took one small step forward. His foot crossed over the white line that had been painted on the ground. Nobody seemed to notice, at first. The remaining tourists were distracted and the guards continued staring straight ahead. Marcus felt a little thrill of excitement. He was breaking the rules, but nothing bad was happening. He raised his camera and took a photo from his new position. Through the lens, he could see the guard and horse much more clearly. The details of the red uniform were crisp and bright. The horse's black coat shined in the sunlight. This was already much better than the photos he had taken from behind the barrier. But Marcus wanted to get even closer. He took another step forward. Now he was clearly inside the restricted area. A woman behind him gasped quietly and whispered something to her husband in French. A teenager with a backpack pointed at Marcus and said something to his friends. But Marcus was too focused on his camera to pay attention to the reactions around him. Wellington. The horse noticed the change immediately. Her ears moved slightly as she sensed someone approaching from an unusual angle. Horses are very sensitive animals, and she could feel that something was different. But her training told her to stay calm and still. She had been taught to ignore distractions and unusual situations. So she remained in position, but her muscles tensed slightly. Marcus was thrilled with his new vantage point. He could see every detail of the guard's uniform. The gold buttons and red fabric looked magnificent through his camera lens. The guard's face was stern and focused. His eyes never moved from their fixed position, staring straight ahead. Marcus snapped photo after photo, feeling more confident with each shot. But the regular photos were still not enough for him. Marcus wanted something truly special. Something that would make his friends back home amazed and jealous. He had seen people take selfies with famous landmarks all over the world. Why not take a selfie with a royal guard and his horse? That would be the ultimate tourist photo. Marcus moved even closer to Wellington. He was now just a few feet away from the large black horse. He could smell the leather of the saddle and see the individual hairs in her mane. The horse was even more beautiful up close. Her breathing was steady and calm. She seemed friendly enough to Marcus, who had very little Experience with horses. He extended his left hand toward Wellington while holding his camera in his right hand. His plan was to gently touch the horse's neck while taking a selfie. He imagined showing this photo to everyone back home. They would be so impressed that he had gotten close enough to actually touch one of the Queen's horses. This would be the Ibae photo that defined his entire London vacation. The guard above him noticed Marcus's movement but remained perfectly still. His training taught him to stay in position unless there was a direct threat. A tourist getting close was annoying but not dangerous. The guard's eyes tracked Marcus's movements, but his body remained like a statue. Marcus reached his hand closer to Wellington's neck. Wellington felt the stranger's hand getting closer to her neck. The horse had been trained for years to handle crowds and unexpected situations. She had stood guard in rain, snow, and blazing heat. She had remained calm during loud parades, fireworks, and even protests. But she had never had a tourist try to touch her while she was on duty. The large black mare shifted her weight slightly from one hoof to another. This was her first sign of discomfort. Horses communicate through body language, and Wellington was trying to tell Marcus that she did not want to be touched. But Marcus had never owned a horse or spent time around these animals. He did not understand what her movement meant. Marcus saw Wellington shift and thought she was being friendly. He believed the horse was acknowledging his presence and welcoming his touch. This made him even more excited about getting his perfect selfie. He moved his hand even closer to her neck while raising his camera with the other hand. He was so focused on the photo opportunity that he ignored all the warning signs. Wellington took a small step backward. This was her second warning to Marcus. In horse language, she was clearly saying that she wanted more space. She was not being aggressive or mean. She was simply trying to create distance between herself and the pushy stranger. Most people who knew horses would have understood this signal and backed away immediately. But Marcus misinterpreted this movement too. He thought Wellington was just adjusting her position to give him a better angle for the photo. He actually moved closer to compensate for the space she had created. Now he was dangerously close to a 1,200-pound military-trained animal who was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. The tourists behind the white line began to notice what was happening. Some people started pointing and whispering to each other. A few pulled out their phones and began recording videos. They sensed that something interesting was about to happen. Some looked worried while others seemed excited to witness potential drama. An elderly British woman shook her head disapprovingly. She had lived in London her entire life and knew the rules about the Royal Guards. She could see that this American tourist was making a serious mistake, but she was too far away to warn him and too polite to shout across the courtyard. Wellington's ears flicked back and forth rapidly. This was another clear sign of her growing anxiety. Her nostrils flared slightly as she breathed harder. The horse was trying every non-aggressive way she knew to communicate her discomfort. She snorted loudly, which made several tourists jump back in surprise. Marcus heard the snort and smiled. He thought Wellington was greeting him or trying to be playful. He had seen horses in movies that made similar sounds when they were happy or excited. He had no idea that snorting was often a sign of stress or warning in horses. His complete lack of experience with these animals was about to get him into serious trouble. The guard sitting on Wellington could feel his horse's tension through the saddle. He knew his mare was becoming agitated, but his strict military training prevented him from breaking character. Royal Guards were taught to remain motionless and silent except in extreme emergencies. A pushy tourist did not qualify as an emergency yet. Wellington stomped one of her front hooves on the ground. The sound echoed off the stone courtyard like a gunshot. This was her final warning to Marcus. She was telling him in the clearest way possible that he needed to back away immediately. But Marcus was so excited about his photo opportunity that he completely missed this obvious signal. Instead of stepping back, Marcus reached out and actually touched Wellington's neck. His fingers made contact with her warm coat, and he grinned widely while trying to position his camera for the selfie. He thought he had succeeded in making friends with the famous horse. Wellington had had enough. Wellington had given Marcus every warning she could. The horse had shifted her weight, stepped backward, snorted loudly, and stomped her hoof. But the persistent tourist had ignored all of her signals. Now she felt trapped between the guard on her back and the stranger trying to touch her. She needed to protect herself and create space. The large black mare turned her head toward Marcus and opened her mouth. Her teeth were large and yellow from years of eating hay and grain. She did not want to hurt the man seriously, but she needed to send a clear message that he was not welcome in her personal space. Wellington gently but firmly bit down on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus felt the horse's teeth grab his shirt and skin. He screamed in surprise and terror. The sound echoed across the stone courtyard like a fire alarm. He had never experienced anything like this before. The horse's mouth was warm and wet, and her grip was strong enough to hold him in place for several seconds. Wellington did not bite down hard enough to cause serious injury. She was a well-trained military horse who knew the difference between defending herself and attacking someone. But her bite was firm enough to get Marcus's attention and push him away from her. She released him quickly and returned to her normal position. Marcus stumbled backward in shock. His expensive camera flew out of his hands and crashed onto the stone ground with a loud cracking sound. The lens shattered into pieces and the camera body bounced twice before coming to rest against the stone wall. 3 years of savings and his dream of perfect vacation photos were destroyed in an instant. The crowd of tourists erupted in gasps and screams. Some people rushed forward to see if Marcus was hurt. Others backed away in fear, thinking the horse might attack again. Several people had their phones out and were recording videos of the entire incident. They knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. A young woman from Germany ran toward Marcus asking if he needed help. An older man from Australia shook his head and muttered about stupid tourists who don't follow rules. A family with small children quickly moved to the back of the crowd to keep their kids safe. Everyone had a different reaction to what they had just seen. Marcus stood frozen in the middle of the courtyard, holding his shoulder where Wellington had bitten him. His blue polo shirt was torn and had wet spots from the horse's saliva. He could feel the indentations from her teeth on his skin. The bite did not hurt as much as he expected, but the shock of what had happened left him unable to move or speak. Wellington immediately returned to her perfectly calm state. Her ears went back to their normal position, and her breathing slowed down. She stood as still as a statue, just like she had been trained to do. To anyone who had not witnessed the incident, she looked exactly the same as before. This was the mark of her excellent training and discipline. The guard sitting on Wellington remained motionless throughout the entire incident. His face showed no emotion, and his eyes continued to stare straight ahead. But inside, he was proud of his horse for handling the situation so professionally. Wellington had defended herself without causing serious harm and had quickly returned to her duty position. Marcus finally looked down at his broken camera on the ground. The lens was completely destroyed, and the camera body had a large crack across the LCD screen. He bent down and picked up the pieces with shaking hands. This camera had cost him almost $1,000 and contained all of his vacation photos from the past 3 days. The crowd began to murmur and point at Marcus. Some people were laughing at his situation while others looked concerned about his injury. Everyone was talking about what they had just witnessed. Several tourists were already posting videos on social media showing the horse biting the foolish American tourist. Marcus realized that dozens of strangers had recorded his embarrassing moment on their phones. For hours, the royal guard had sat silently on his horse like a living statue. He had ignored camera flashes, loud tourists, crying children, and even people trying to make him laugh or smile. His training had taught him to remain perfectly still and quiet no matter what happened around him. But Marcus had crossed a line that could not be ignored. The guard's deep voice cut through the noise of the crowd like a sword through silk. His words were clear, authoritative, and carried the weight of hundreds of years of military tradition. Every person in the courtyard stopped talking and turned to look at him. Even small children sensed the power in his voice and became quiet. "Sir, you have crossed a clearly marked boundary and disturbed a military animal on duty." The guard's eyes remained fixed straight ahead as he spoke. He never looked down at Marcus or acknowledged the crowd around them. His voice was steady and controlled, without any anger or emotion. This made his words even more powerful and intimidating. Marcus felt his face turn red with embarrassment. The guard's formal military language made him realize how seriously he had messed up. This was not just about taking a tourist photo anymore. He had interfered with official Royal Guard duties. He had disrespected centuries of British military tradition. He had put himself and the horse in danger. The crowd fell completely silent as the guard continued speaking. Please return to the designated area immediately and remain behind the white lines. His command was not a request or suggestion. It was an order given by a trained soldier who expected to be obeyed without question. The tone of his voice made it clear that further disobedience would have serious consequences. Several tourists stepped back instinctively even though the guard was not speaking to them. His authoritative presence affected everyone in the area. Parents pulled their children closer and whispered warnings about following rules. Other visitors checked to make sure they were standing in the correct areas behind the white lines. Marcus scrambled backward toward the designated tourist area. His shoulder throbbed where Wellington had bitten him, and his broken camera pieces rattled in his hands. He wanted to disappear into the crowd and pretend this whole incident had never happened. But dozens of people were staring at him and recording everything on their phones. The guard returned to his silent vigil as soon as Marcus was back behind the white line. His brief moment of speaking was over and he became a statue once again. His face showed no expression, and his breathing remained steady and controlled. It was as if the previous few minutes had never happened except for the tension that still hung in the air. Wellington also returned to her perfect stillness. The intelligent mare understood that the threat had been dealt with and she could relax again. Her ears moved to their normal position, and her breathing slowed to its regular rhythm. She stood as motionless as her rider, showing the incredible discipline that made the Royal Guards famous around the world. An elderly British gentleman in the crowd nodded approvingly at how the situation had been handled. He had served in the military himself many years ago, and respected the Guards' professionalism. The soldier had dealt with a difficult situation using exactly the right amount of authority without escalating the problem unnecessarily. A group of teenagers from France whispered excitedly to each other about what they had just witnessed. They had never seen a Royal Guard speak before, and were amazed by the power of his presence. One of them said it was like watching a statue come to life for a few magical seconds before turning back to stone. Marcus stood among the other tourists, feeling completely humiliated. Everyone was looking at him and talking about what he had done. Some people seemed angry that he had broken the rules, while others appeared amused by his situation. A few visitors looked concerned about his injury and asked if he needed medical attention. The broken camera in his hands represented more than just damaged equipment. It symbolized his ruined vacation and his foolish decision to ignore clearly posted rules. 3 years of saving money and planning had led to this moment of public embarrassment. Marcus wished he could turn back time and make different choices. The guard's words continued to echo in his mind as he realized the full impact of what he had done. Within minutes of the incident, security personnel appeared at Horse Guard's parade. They had been alerted by other Royal Guards who had witnessed what happened from their posts around the courtyard. The security team moved quickly but calmly toward Marcus, who was still standing behind the white line holding pieces of his broken camera. 2 security guards approached Marcus with serious expressions on their faces. They were not aggressive or threatening, but their presence made it clear that this was now an official matter. One guard was a tall man with gray hair who looked like he had dealt with difficult tourists many times before. The other was a younger woman with sharp eyes who immediately began assessing the situation. The older security guard spoke to Marcus in a firm but professional voice. He explained that crossing the designated boundaries and disturbing military animals was a serious violation of rules that protected both tourists and the Royal Guards. Marcus nodded nervously and tried to explain that he had only wanted to take a photo, but his excuses sounded weak and childish even to himself. Meanwhile, other security personnel moved through the crowd asking witnesses what they had seen. Several tourists eagerly shared their videos and photos of the incident. The guards made notes and collected contact information from people who had recorded the event. They wanted to have a complete record of what had happened in case there were any legal issues later. A kind tourist picked up the remaining pieces of Marcus's broken camera from the stone ground. The lens was completely shattered and the camera body had a deep crack across the back. The man handed the damaged equipment to one of the security guards, who placed it in a clear plastic bag as evidence. Marcus watched sadly as his expensive camera disappeared into official custody. The security team escorted Marcus away from the Royal Guards to a small office building nearby. He was not arrested or handcuffed, but it was clear that he had no choice in the matter. Dozens of camera phones followed his every step as he walked across the courtyard. The crowd parted to let them pass while continuing to record videos and take photos. Wellington and her rider remained perfectly calm throughout the entire security response. The horse showed no signs of stress or agitation from the earlier incident. She stood as still as a statue while chaos swirled around her. This demonstrated the incredible training and discipline that made the Royal Guards and their horses so respected around the world. The other Royal Guard on duty continued his silent vigil as if nothing unusual had happened. His face remained expressionless and his eyes stayed fixed straight ahead. Tourists continued to take photos of him from behind the white lines while security dealt with Marcus in the background. The normal rhythm of the attraction resumed quickly. In the security office, Marcus had to provide his passport and explain his actions in detail. The guards asked him why he had ignored the clearly marked boundaries and warning signs. They wanted to know if he understood that Wellington was a working military animal who could have seriously injured him. Marcus felt more embarrassed with each question. A medical professional was called to examine Marcus's shoulder where Wellington had bitten him. The bite had left clear teeth marks and some bruising but no serious damage. The horse had shown remarkable restraint considering her size and strength. The medic cleaned the wound and applied antiseptic, while explaining how much worse the injury could have been. Marcus had to fill out several incident reports describing exactly what had happened from his perspective. His hands shook as he wrote about crossing the white line and trying to touch Wellington. Reading his own words on paper made him realize how foolish his actions had been. He kept apologizing, but the damage was already done. The security guards explained that Marcus would receive an official warning and would be banned from returning to Horse Guards Parade for the remainder of his visit to London. They could have pressed more serious charges but decided that the public embarrassment and damaged camera were punishment enough. Marcus signed documents acknowledging his understanding of the restrictions. Meanwhile, back at the courtyard, the crowd was slowly dispersing. Most tourists had gotten their photos and videos of the aftermath and were moving on to other attractions. But the story of the American tourist who got bitten by the Royal Guards horse was already spreading across social media platforms around the world. Marcus emerged from the security office 2 hours later, feeling completely defeated. His dream vacation had turned into a nightmare of embarrassment and regret. The broken camera in the evidence bag represented much more than damaged equipment. It symbolized his poor judgment and disrespect for British traditions that he had claimed to admire. The lesson learned. Marcus walked slowly back to his hotel feeling like the most embarrassed person in all of London. His shoulder ached from Wellington's bite, and his heart was heavy with regret. The torn blue polo shirt that his wife had bought him was ruined. The expensive camera he had saved for was destroyed. But worst of all, his pride and dignity were completely shattered. As he walked through the busy London streets, Marcus noticed people looking at their phones and laughing. He wondered if they were watching videos of his humiliating encounter with the Royal Guards horse. The incident had happened only a few hours ago, but he already felt like the whole world knew about his foolish mistake. Back in his hotel room, Marcus sat on the bed and called his wife in Ohio. She could hear the sadness in his voice immediately and asked what was wrong. Marcus had to explain how his dream of getting the perfect tourist photo had led to disaster. His wife listened quietly as he described crossing the white line, touching the horse, and getting bitten in front of dozens of strangers. His wife was understanding but also disappointed. She reminded Marcus that he had always been impulsive, and that this tendency had gotten him into trouble before. But she also said she was glad he was not seriously injured, and that material things like cameras could be replaced. Her gentle words made Marcus feel both better and worse about what he had done. That evening, Marcus discovered that his incident had become famous on social media. Videos of Wellington biting him were being shared millions of times across different platforms. People were commenting in dozens of languages. Most comments were making fun of him for ignoring the rules and disrespecting British traditions. Some called him the dumbest tourist ever. Marcus read hundreds of comments about his behavior. Many people used his incident as an example of why Americans had a bad reputation as tourists. Others defended him, saying that anyone could make a mistake when excited about vacation photos. But the overwhelming majority of responses were negative and critical of his actions. The story was picked up by news websites and blogs around the world. Headlines read, "American Tourist Bitten by Royal Guard Horse After Crossing Barriers," and "When Photo Ops Go Wrong, Tourist Learns Hard Lesson in London." Marcus had become an internet celebrity for all the wrong reasons. His embarrassing moment would be preserved online forever. But as the days passed, Marcus began to understand the deeper lessons from his experience. He realized that his desire for the perfect photo had made him lose sight of respect and common sense. The white lines and warning signs were not just arbitrary rules. They were there to protect both visitors and the magnificent animals who served, the royal guards. Marcus also learned about the incredible training and discipline of Wellington and her rider. The horse had shown remarkable restraint by giving him multiple warnings before defending herself. She could have seriously injured him but chose to use only enough force to make her point. The guard had maintained his professional composure throughout the entire incident. He began to research the history and traditions of the royal guards. Marcus discovered that these soldiers and their horses had been protecting the British royal family for centuries. They underwent years of rigorous training to develop the discipline and skill he had witnessed. His actions had shown disrespect for this proud military tradition. Marcus spent his remaining days in London visiting other attractions while staying carefully behind all barriers and following every rule. He took photos with a disposable camera he bought at a convenience store. The pictures were not as sharp or professional as his expensive camera would have produced, but they captured his memories without causing any problems. When Marcus returned home to Ohio, he had to face the consequences of his internet fame. Co-workers and neighbors had seen the videos and news stories about his encounter with Wellington. Some people teased him good-naturedly, while others were more critical. His children were embarrassed that their father had become known as the horsebite tourist. But Marcus decided to use his experience as a teaching moment. He began speaking to local groups about the importance of respecting local customs and following rules when traveling. He shared his story as an example of how the desire for the perfect photo could lead to serious consequences. His message was simple: no picture is worth compromising safety or showing disrespect. Years later, Marcus still felt embarrassed when people recognized him from the viral videos. But he also felt proud that he had learned from his mistake and used his experience to help others avoid similar problems. His encounter with Wellington had taught him valuable lessons about respect, boundaries, and the true meaning of being a responsible tourist. The crowd's reaction to what had just happened was immediate and intense. Different groups of people responded in completely different ways to Marcus's embarrassing encounter with Wellington. The courtyard buzzed with excitement as everyone tried to process what they had witnessed. A group of young backpackers from Australia burst into laughter. They thought Marcus's situation was hilarious and kept replaying videos on their phones while pointing at him. One of them said loudly that Americans always think rules don't apply to them. Their laughter was infectious, and soon other people in the crowd were chuckling and smiling at Marcus's expense. But not everyone found the situation funny. A middle-aged couple from Japan looked genuinely concerned about Marcus's injury. The dazed woman approached him and asked in broken English if he needed help or medical attention. She pointed to his torn shirt and the red marks on his shoulder where Wellington had bitten him. Her husband bowed politely and offered Marcus a bottle of water from their backpack. An elderly British woman shook her head in disapproval and made clucking sounds with her tongue. She had been watching tourists behave badly at this location for over 20 years. She muttered loud enough for people around her to hear that some visitors had no respect for British traditions or military protocol. She seemed personally offended that Marcus had disturbed the royal guard. Several parents used the incident as a teaching moment for their children. A father from Germany knelt down next to his young son and explained why it was important to follow rules and respect boundaries. A mother from Canada pointed to the white lines on the ground and told her daughter that rules exist for everyone's safety. The children listened with wide eyes, clearly impressed by what had happened. The teenagers in the crowd were the most excited about the whole situation. They immediately started posting videos and photos on social media platforms. Within minutes, clips of Marcus getting bitten by the horse were being shared on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. They added captions like, "Tourist gets owned by Royal Guard horse," and "When you ignore the rules in London." A professional photographer from Italy who had been taking pictures of the guards shook his head sadly. He understood Marcus's desire to get better photos but could not believe someone would be so foolish. He had been photographing the royal guards for years and always respected the boundaries. He muttered in Italian about tourists who give all visitors a bad reputation. Some people in the crowd seemed nervous and worried that more drama might happen. A family with small children moved to the back of the group and prepared to leave quickly if the situation got worse. The father kept looking around for security guards or police officers. His wife held their baby closer and whispered that maybe they should visit a different attraction. A group of college students from Spain were fascinated by the horse's behavior. They discussed among themselves how Wellington had given Marcus several warnings before biting him. One student who was studying animal behavior explained to her friends how horses communicate through body language. They were impressed by the mare's restraint and training. Marcus could hear people talking about him in multiple languages. He caught fragments of conversations in English, but could only imagine what was being said in French, German, Spanish, and other languages. The universal laughter and pointing made it clear that his situation was being discussed and judged by everyone present. An older American couple looked embarrassed to be from the same country as Marcus. They distanced themselves from him physically and avoided making eye contact. The husband whispered to his wife that Marcus was making all American tourists look bad. They had been carefully following all the rules and respecting British customs during their visit. A local London businessman who passed by the scene every day on his way to work stopped to watch the aftermath. He had seen countless tourists take photos of the guards but had never witnessed anything like this. He pulled out his phone and took a few pictures of Marcus holding his broken camera while standing shamefully behind the white line. The crowd continued to grow as word spread about the incident. New arrivals asked existing tourists what had happened and were quickly filled in on the details. Marcus realized that his story was being told and retold to dozens of strangers who were all forming opinions about his behavior and judgment.